Hello and welcome to this Tech Target video. I'm Ed Moyle and this is a companion video for the article about using Metasploit that you may have seen up on the site. So I'm just going to walk through another example of how to use the Metasploit framework in a attack context. So how to utilize an exploit to gain remote access to a machine that you may want to get access to. So that could be a penetration testing scenario. It could be testing of a particular issue that you may encounter kind of in your own environment. It may just be for the purposes of testing, just because you want to educate yourself on the tool. For whatever reason, we're just going to walk through how you might do that should you want to. So in order to get set up, if you wanted to follow along, I'll draw your attention to the fact that the setup for this is actually pretty simple. It's the same setup that we had for the purposes of that article. So there's two running virtual machine instances. So I'm using a hypervisor here. I'm using VMware Workstation. I just happen to like that one, but you don't have to go with that choice. You can use VirtualBox, you can use Hyper-V. Really you can use whatever kind of hypervisor you want. To emulate this kind of same scenario. You could use the hypervisor of your choice. So I have two instances running, right? So the first one is a default Kali Linux instance. I've just used the stock virtual appliance that they have available on their site. So if you go to Kali Linux, to the download page of that site, you'll notice that one of the options that they have there is virtual appliances. The reason that I'm using Kali to do this is because of the fact that it has the Metasploit framework built into it already. So it just comes with it. You don't have to do anything. It's just up and ready to go. So this is completely stock. I haven't even changed the passwords or usernames, as you can, or machine name or anything like that, as you can tell from this prompt here. So that's image number one. The other image is the Metasploitable 2 image. So Metasploitable, if you recall from the article, is a virtual machine image that's designed to be vulnerable to a number of different attacks. So we're actually going to use that one because of the fact that the purpose, its whole raison d'etre, the reason it exists, is to be able to be attacked by Metasploit. So because of that, it's a really good learning tool for you to become familiar with the Metasploit framework commands and what they do and how to use them. So that's what we're using. So it's the Kali Linux and Metasploitable 2. Now, of course, there are, as you can imagine from the fact that it's Metasploitable 2, there are other versions of Metasploitable. So if you want to try a different one, you're certainly welcome to do that. But in this case, we are just using the Metasploitable 2 version. So I'm going to zoom us in here just so that we can actually get to work. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to use Nmap. Now in the article, you saw how we used actually the Metasploit framework itself, one of the auxiliaries, to do port scanning. In this case, we're just going to do Nmap because, well, mix things up a little bit. And I'm just going to put the IP address in there. So I'm just going to do a basic scan, nothing fancy. And then let's just kind of pick the first one. So we notice the FTP service here. Let's see what kind of FTP service that is. So we'll just use our handy dandy netcat, and we'll netcat over to that and see what kind, see if the banner tells us anything, and it does. So it tells us that it's VS FTPD. So that's the very secure FTP daemon. Now in this case, the very secure name is a little bit ironic because this particular version of VSFTP happens to have a backdoor that's built into it. So we're actually going to exploit that. So to do so, we're going to bring up Msf Console, which you may recall from the article. That's to just enter the Metasploit Framework console environment that we can use to actually enter our commands. So it brings it up. The very first thing we'll do is we'll start and see if we'll use the search command to see if there is anything matching VSFTP. And it turns out that there is, as we suspected there might be. There's a VSFTPD version 234, and you'll notice that up here it's version 234. backdoor, so we can actually use that one. So let's just go ahead and we'll use the use command and tell it to use this particular exploit. Now, we can type the full name. We can use this number too. In this case, we're going to type the full name just because why not be specific? The next thing that we're going to do is to configure the payload. Now, normally, with a lot of exploits, there are a bunch of different options that we might have for specifically what payload to use. In this case, though, there's really only one, but let's pretend that we wanted to see all of what the compatible payloads are. You'll notice that as we expected, there's only the one, and it's already set to the default. But let's just explicitly set it anyway, just for the purposes of exercising that functionality. So in this case, again, we can put the full name there, or we can use the number, but we'll go ahead and use the full name. And now we need to know if there are any other options, configuration options that we might need to set. So if you remember from the article, the command for that is the show command, and then we'll say show options. And that's going to tell us what all the various different options are that are required for this particular exploit and payload combination. So in this case, because we picked on purpose a fairly simple one, there's only one that's required for us, and that's this value rhosts. Now rhosts, the R in that is the remote host IP address. So we'll actually set rhosts, and we'll put the IP address of the remote Metasploitable in there. So that is now set. For a lot of exploits that you might, and exploit payload combinations that you might want to use, such as the one that we demoed in that article, you'll notice that you'd want to also set the lhost and lport value. In some other combinations, it can get even more complicated than that. But we're doing a very simple example just to get you familiar with the, with kind of the various commands and the kind of the normative use or simple use. So we'll use this one that's fairly straightforward. So we'll show options again. Helpful if I spelled it right. And you can see that all of the various different things that it wants are now complete. They're now filled in. So at this point, we can actually go ahead and use the exploit command, which will actually begin our exploiting. And in this case, it's going to give us a remote shell on that instance. So you'll see here it says command shell session 1 opened. Now what does sometimes throw people, particularly if they're not used to using tools like this or exploit code or what have you, is that they wonder where the prompt is, which is useful to talk about. So in this case, there's no prompt that's being shown to us. And the reason for that is because of the fact that we're using an exploit. So it's not an interactive environment that's been designed for the purpose of providing helpful information to the user. It's kind of a backdoor in, right? So it's really not anticipated that somebody would be be in there in this way. So in this case, we don't actually have any kind of prompt, but you'll notice that if we put a simple command in there, so in this case, let's say, who am I? We just type that. And it says that we're root. So that's always a good starting point. So we'll go ahead and test that theory by trying to do something like cat the shadow file, which turns out that we can do that too. So, at this point, we can pretty much do whatever we want. So if we wanted to, we could put, a flag file there if this was a pen test and we wanted to demonstrate that we had writable access to the root file system. Well, we can go ahead and do that. And then if we wanted to, list that value, you could notice that that flag is right there. So the point being that we just went through all of the various different options that and commands, arguably certainly simple ones on purpose to demonstrate, but really this is at its core pretty much the majority of how you would use the Metasploit framework, at least for a penetration testing type use case. Now, of course, the hard part, as you could probably tell both from reading the the article as well as looking at this demo is not the syntax of using the Metasploit framework itself. That's actually the easy part. It's easy in large part because of the fantastic work of all the folks who work on this tool, who have made it easy and made that interface standard and consistent. But the fact of the matter is that it is standard and consistent, so it's not the hard part. The hard part is actually going to be finding out for the device that you want to attack, what is it vulnerable to? And actually, that is where your reconnaissance comes in. That's where your vulnerability scanning comes in. That's where your knowledge of the environment comes in. So if you're concerned about a particular issue, say like MS, the Eternal Blue MS-17, whichever one that was, the Eternal Blue vulnerability, that one you would use that as kind of your starting point, and then utilize the specific exploit within Metasploit Framework to make use of that and exploit it and gain access. So that's really kind of it in a nutshell. So with that, I will thank you for your time, and hopefully this was helpful to you in learning how to use the Metasploit framework.